The master barber, surgeon tightened the leather strap across the patient's wrists and said, "Hold her still." The strap cut into pale skin. Fear tightened the anonymous patient's jaw. She swallowed around thick air and did not speak. The ward smelled of boiled herbs and blood. Within that first minute the central problem was visible. Pain had been prescribed as medicine, and the patient had no genuine choice. The narrator recorded the scene without sympathy. He stepped back, pen hovering over his ledger, and described how clerics and physicians had recast punishment as purification. His voice named the institutional purpose while the surgeon worked. Fear drove the patient's movements. It made her fingers clench the frayed talisman at her throat. That fear shaped her choices. Compliance to avoid worse measures, silence to keep whatever dignity remained. The surgeon's motions were mechanical. He did not look at the patient. He set instruments on the table and touched the bone, handled lancet by its handle. His fingertips bore ink stains. The patient tried to steady her breathing. "Please," she managed, voice thin. "Please, it hurts." The surgeon kept his hands steady and did not answer. The narrator wrote the prescription line into the ledger with an unemotional cadence. "Bleed and incise. Ritual marking observed." The first external event arrived when a pair of attendants entered the ward and locked the outer iron door. One attendant set down a lantern, another laid a folded cloth on the bench. The room became a small island of light. The narrator read aloud from the ledger in a flat tone, citing the clause that authorized ritual pain to purge maladies of body and sin. His reading shifted the work from procedure to policy. Outside the lamp glow, the patient registered the ledger clause with a new movement. Suspicion. She tugged at the strap once, testing whether resistance mattered. That suspicion shifted into dread as the surgeon traced a small cross on her shoulder with a stick of charcoal, then smiled without warmth. "This will clear you," he said. The patient said nothing. Her mouth moved around dry air. The ward's pattern repeated. Preparation marking binding. Instruments arrived in a basket. A set of forceps, a grooved iron, small saws, and the bone-handled lancet. The surgeon arranged them like tools on a bench, methodical. The attendants murmured a short ritual, fingers moving over prayer beads. The narrator annotated the motion with precise facts. The beads were counted. The margin note recorded which saints were invoked for which symptoms. The ritual framed action as therapy, and the ritual's rhythm made the room obedient. The patient tried to speak again. "Master barber, surgeon," she said, and used his title to anchor her plea. "This is for fever, not crime. Please." He cut the plea off with a single precise motion. He tied a strip of linen around her forehead and said, "Silence will not serve you, patient." The men exchanged no further words. The narrator noted the exchange and the way institutional language converted pleas into categorical categories. The second external event came when the master leaned over the ledger and studied a margin the narrator had just recorded. The master frowned and his hands stopped moving. The narrator cleared his throat and bent to read. The marginalia were written in smaller, darker ink, a line naming a prisoner and a directive to apply same method. The ward's purpose bent in that moment. The patient, mid-breath, watched the ledger and realized the method was used for control as often as cure. Doubt rippled through the patient. She had first come seeking relief. Doubt turned her inward, then outward in fury. She tried to pull free. The attendants tightened their grips. "Let me go," she said. "Let me go, please, Master Barber." Surgeon replied, "You are for treatment," and tapped the ledger with a stained fingertip. He sounded like a man quoting law. The narrator recorded the lines and the exchange became a concrete proof. The procedure served both meanings. The mood shifted again when the surgeon began his ritual preparation. He made a small incision near the wrist, not deep, and wiped the blood with a linen square. He whispered a short litany as he worked. The patient counted the words by sound. Fear moved into resignation. She ceased to resist because resistance had become certain to bring more pain. The narrator narrated the list of tools and the litany phrases, making the scene feel like an entry in a ledger rather than a human act. An external sound interrupted. The iron door groaned as a late messenger knocked twice. The surgeon did not look up but hissed a command, and the attendant smashed the bolt from within. A small rusted key slid into the lock. The messenger left without entering. That knock, ordinary, reminded the patient that the ward sat within a larger institution whose decisions arrived and left like servants with sealed envelopes. The first confrontation escalated into quick dialogue between the patient and the surgeon. "Master Barber, surgeon," she said, voice cracking. "I told the parish that I have fevers." "I told Sister Marta," he answered. Sister Marta recorded confession. Ledger endorses ritual. Patient quiet. The patient reached up and hit the table rail. "You recorded me as suspect," she spat. "You made me a criminal. I record as instructed," he replied. "I cut where required." The exchange grew sharper. 3 rapid lines moved between them, each name used to anchor accusations. Those lines forced an action. The surgeon applied the lancet and drew a shallow incision over the patient's forearm. Blood beaded and ran into a patch of linen. The patient made a sharp sound and kicked. The attendants tightened their grips. The surgeon's rasping voice said, "This is medicine," and the narrator's pen scratched another entry. The patient felt anger flare. Fear folded into anger toward procedure and toward those who used medicine to punish. The third external event came when the narrator found a detailed marginal annotation, a list of names beneath a column labeled "Obedient after regimen." One name was crossed and the word "silenced" appeared. The narrator lifted his head and read the line aloud. "Silenced," he said. The word landed like a stone in the room. The patient stared at the ledger, then at the surgeon. She understood that the regimen consolidated power by erasing dissent. Tension built toward the chapter's peak. The surgeon chose the authoritative option. He set the lancet deeper, pressed his thumb into the cut to widen the opening, and ordered more pressure. "Bind tight." The patient convulsed under the binds. Her breathing became a series of ragged pulls. The attendants obeyed with efficient motions. The surgeon had moved from clinical hands to an assertion of control. The narrator recorded specific motions. Tie tightened, linen pressed, a prayer bead dropped and rolled on the floor. The climax arrived as the surgeon took a small heated iron from the tray and hovered it over the incision. The patient tried to turn her head. "Stop," she gasped. "Stop." The surgeon's face remained controlled. He did not look at her. "This is for the body's cleansing," he said. He did not speak of punishment. He spoke of cure. The narrator watched and wrote every measured detail. The iron's glow. The patient's pupils contracted. The attendants silent. The patient convulsed and vomited. The room filled with the metallic smell of blood and boiled herbs. A short, rapid argument followed when the patient suddenly spat. "You lie. You use this for prisoners." The surgeon barked back. "You have no proof." The patient said, "The ledger says so." The narrator tapped the ledger with his pen. "Read it then," he said to the barber. "Surgeon." "Master Barber." Surgeon looked at the margin, then at the patient, then at the narrator. For 6 breaths the room held. The surgeon's jaw tightened. He pulled the iron away and said, "Enough noise. Bandage." The shift, anger to command, altered nothing about the wound. It altered who held authority over truth. Blood soaked the linens. The surgeon ordered a scribe be summoned. The narrator described the scribe's arrival. A thin man with ink, streaked fingers and barely audible steps. The scribe bent to the ledger and the surgeon dictated euphemisms. Procedure successful. Patient stabilized. No complications reported. The scribe copied the phrasing. The patient watched every stroke of the quill and felt a chilling clarity. The ledger would hide the pain. The mid-chapter cliffhanger came when the narrator examined a second marginal note written in different ink. It ordered that any political detainee showing certain symptoms be routed through the infirmary and flagged "recover by regimen." The narrator let that phrase stand on the page for a long moment before speaking it aloud. The patient reached out and touched the ledger, fingers trembling. "Who writes this?" she asked. No one answered. Now the emotional compass rotated. Resignation hardened into a small contained fury. The patient stopped pleading and began to watch for openings, small bodily strategies to survive the next round. She kept her eyes on the surgeon's hands, memorizing motion sequences. The narrator took note of the patient, cataloging the room, how the lantern leaned, where the attendant stood, the exact loop in the surgeon's apron where he kept the lancet. A new external action occurred when one attendant slipped a folded note under the surgeon's elbow and mouthed a word. The surgeon read quickly, folded it back, and tucked it into his apron. He did not share the content. The patient watched this concealment and adjusted her breathing rhythm. She calculated that someone else in the institution knew of the ledger's use. That thought seeded a plan. If others knew, a record might be exposed. The narrator then recorded the altered ledger entry in full, in speech, and quoted the surgeon's exact dictation. The patient listened to the words turned into sterile language, felt them replace what she had endured, and clenched her teeth. The surgeon's voice grew colder as he instructed the scribe, write therapeutic intervention. The scribe wrote. The patient swallowed and tasted iron. Another short confrontation erupted when the patient forced the words from her throat. You call this therapy? She asked, eyes fixed on the surgeon. You tied me like a criminal and burned my arm. The surgeon's hand rested on the ledger. You speak foolishly, he said. You were unwell. That is all. The patient spat. Scribe, write what you see. The scribe's hand hesitated for a single second, dipped the quill back into ink, then wrote what the surgeon ordered. The third external event. Footsteps in the corridor. A senior cleric paused at the threshold and did not enter. The surgeon touched his apron and straightened the linen. The cleric moved on. The patient noted the pattern of oversight. Officials passed by like weather. The ward's routines remained intact. That realization narrowed the patient's choices to two practical tracks: hide the ledger or keep living under prescribed pain. The narrator closed the night's notes with an observation and an act. He listed the names that appeared in margins and underlined the instruction that equated regimen with obedience. Then he stopped writing, closed the ledger, and handed it to the surgeon. The surgeon received it without thanks. The scribe collected the quill and ink and began rubbing at a blot where a prior line had been scored out. The patient watched the scribe erase with water and a cloth. The erasure was the ward's final, surgical motion. The final external beat occurred when the surgeon reached across the table, took the candle from its holder, and pinched the flame between calloused fingers. The lantern's glow shrank. The ward's noises, drops, distant creaks, filled the room for a passing breath. The surgeon set the candle back, face unreadable, and told the attendants to take the patient to the upper chamber to rest. They moved her with efficient silence. In the closing moments, the narrator wrote the night's formal entry. Treatment administered. Patient stabilized. Further observation advised. He did not add the marginalia aloud. The patient, half-carried, fixed her gaze on the ledger as if memorizing the handwriting. Her anger rested in that act. A plan to remember letters, strokes, and the name of the scribe who had hesitated. The chapter ends on a single concrete act tied to the ward's machinery. The surgeon turned the ledger face down, blew the last candle, and tapped the leather cover once with a finger. The sound was small, final, and deliberate. A scribe closed his hand over his quill. The patient lay motionless on the stretcher as attendants carried her toward the stair. The iron door clanged shut behind them, and the narrator recorded a line that would form the next step in the story. The ledger would be followed. Rain cut the courtyard cobbles into bright knives. The novice walked bent and slow, one hand on the rope at the woman's wrists, the other pressed to his chest. Doubt lodged beneath his ribs before they reached the treatment door. He had been ordered at dawn. He had followed orders at the strap and felt the same knot of doubt tightening his jaw. The patient did not fight. She kept her eyes downward and breathed through narrow lungs. The immediate problem was visible and concrete. The hospital treated illness by producing pain, and the novice had begun to wonder whether the pain served the sick or the men who kept the books. They crossed under the timbered eaves toward the treatment chamber. The master barber surgeon stood by the antechamber table, apron folded over his hands, instruments already laid out on oiled cloth. The master glanced at the novice, then at the patient. "Hold her steady," he said. The voice was low, practiced. It carried the calm of routine. The novice obeyed. He tightened the rope and felt the woman's wrists slide under his fingers like a small animal seeking purchase. The first 5 sentences established the conflict. The hospital's prescribed cure relied on deliberate harm. The novice's doubt drives him to look for evidence. This doubt would push him to act, to hesitate, and ultimately to take a small, dangerous step. They moved through a narrow antechamber smelling of boiled herbs. A visiting cleric stood beside the hospital overseer, robes still damp from the rain. The master spread his palms over the instruments and described the ritual cure by naming actions, not metaphors. "We cauterize sepsis, we lance stagnation." "We draw the humors that feed the fever," he said, tapping a bone-handled lancet with a forefinger stained by ink. The cleric frowned once, quick and thin. "Do you absolve these methods, master?" the cleric asked. His voice held a theological caution, the kind that performs piety and asks for procedural safety. The master answered plainly, "I have seen it free patients of fever and pox. I follow the rules written here. Pain is purification and confession." "The ledger proves it." He pushed a flat palm toward a stack of ledgers on a small desk. Thick pages, iron clasp, marginal notes pressed into the corner of each sheet. The novice watched the exchange and listened to the ledger's presence saw the air. He had seen the master fasten straps in the last chapter. He had watched a leather strap cut into skin while the master spoke the same calm commands. The memory from the first treatment pressed into the novice's throat. The master tightening the leather and saying, "Hold her still," that event hung between them now like a demonstration. The novice's doubt shifted. First suspicion of method, then a colder suspicion of motive. The master ushered the patient into the treatment chamber. The room was low, ceilinged. Oak beams darkened with smoke. A single hearth provided heat and a flame guttering under a blackened brazier. The novice stacked bowls, laid linen, adjusted the patient's head with gentleness that betrayed his inexperience. The master moved with deliberate, practiced economy, fingers steady as he set jaws of cautery to the flame. The novice found a folded page beneath an instrument tray as he reached for forceps. He paused, fingers hovering. The page was old and gray at the edges. The ink had smudged with sweat. He did not read aloud. He unfolded the ledger line by line with a furtive, efficient motion, a hand that trembled in small, buried ways. The marginalia were not clinical notations alone. A column of sums ran down one margin. Names appeared beside the sums. Beside one name, an abbreviated word suggested favors. Beside another, a note read like an instruction. Use cautery for confessions. The novice's doubt turned into alarm. He folded the page back and slid it into the hem of his tunic. He did not yet know whether he was stealing evidence or simply keeping a curiosity. He understood only that the ledger altered the master's statements from medical claims into something that could be politicized. He had been told in the ward's early hours that pain purified, and now a list said pain could extract goods and pledges. The master began the ritual precisely. He set the cautery near the patient's cheek and lanced with a small, controlled movement. The novice held a linen cloth and dipped it in boiled wine. He felt every tremor in his hands, and he watched the patient's lips press into quiet lines. The patient said nothing. Her breath came quick. The master worked and spoke the practical instructions aloud to the novice as if he taught a craft. Tie firm. Do not let the limb shift. Saw the hair back. Apply the lint. When the cautery bites, press the brass into the wound to seal. His words were short commands. The novice echoed emotion. The patient flinched once when the cautery seared. A small sound escaped her throat. The cleric murmured a prayer and watched. The hospital overseer recorded details on a wooden tablet. The atmosphere in the chamber narrowed to tasks. Hold the limb, steady the flame, bind, count breaths. The master's hands found a rhythm. He probed with the lancet, withdrew, and rid the wound like a craftsman reading grain. Later, during a pause between procedures, the novice risked a glance at the ledger page he had hidden. He unfolded it beneath a tray, fingertips quick. The marginalia bore names he recognized. A widow whose rent had been reduced. A guild master who had asked the master to look after his son. An official whose health had been preserved following a private procedure. Beside one line, the inked note read, "Secure testimony. Withhold care until truth is told." The novice's reading stopped at that sentence and started again. The ledger used medical language and payment records to secure obedience. He took a breath and stepped back to the trestle. The master looked up, eyes narrow. "Novice," he said, and the word lay heavy in the room. The novice did not answer at once. He kept his face, kept his hands moving in small, competent motions. The master's lips pressed thin. He did not touch the ledgers while the patient convulsed on the trestle. Later, he would pick a quill and write with clean strokes. The novice spoke finally, his voice low. "There are names in your ledger, master. Payments, tutelage. Notes about testimony." He tried to make the observation sound like a question, like a request for instruction. "What does that mean for treatment?" The master set down the lancet.